Yeah. And I watched a mother be really rigid with her boundaries coming from fear. Her boundaries came from fear. So anytime we see somebody being really, really rigid with their boundaries, we know that their come from is probably control, which is based in fear.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today on Thrive Over Survive, where we give you tips, stories, and inspiration to not just live your day to day, but thrive so you can have a life you enjoy. And I'm so excited to have my guest, Krista Resnick, Master Boundary Coach, here with us. She is an expert podcaster and mother to 3 adult-ish boys. Her love and passion for boundaries is the byproduct of her own story. Having spent decades pleasing everyone, which we all know, a lot of us know that feeling, Krista felt disempowered, inauthentic, and passionless in every aspect of her life. Through her own personal healing work, she began to find great empowerment through the art of boundaries and expressing her truth. Now serving hundreds of women across the globe, Krista has witnessed the transformative power of embodying healthy boundaries. She believes that a well-boundaried life empowers women to stop people-pleasing and come back home to themselves so they can create lives and relationships that are purposeful and passion-fueled. So, Krista, I'm so excited for you to join us, and I'm excited to hear about that journey that led you to where you are today. So do you want to kind of tell the viewers what led you here and why you are now a master boundary coach? Because I feel like a lot of people might not know what that is.
Yeah.
In detail, like what it entails.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction, Emma. I'm really honored and grateful to have this time with you and to just share some things that I've learned along my way with your listeners. So, Master Boundary Coach, I don't like to get hung up in titles. I've never been one of those people who, loves alphabet soup on the backside of someone's name. And now that I've become a master boundary coach, I do see the beauty in that. And so what master boundary coach means is that I am someone who has embodied my own work. I walk my walk and I talk my talk. There's a lot. It's so important. It is so important. It is integrity. And especially in a area of work where there's not a lot of, I don't want to say standards, but there's just not a lot of, it's not regulated. The self-development world is not regulated. And so anybody can decide in the morning that they want to wake up and be a coach. And yes.
I think I went on a rant about this on one of my lives, like just shortly, because it's so important. We could probably do like a whole nother tailwind on that, but you're right. It's not regulated and it's kind of not in integrity. A lot of people aren't in integrity.
And it's important and it will show in your work. And you are involving yourself in people's lives that really need the help and the support. And so the master came from a master certified program that I was involved in where I had to do, not only did I have to coach other people, I had to be walking through my own stuff simultaneously. Yeah, it was the most extraordinary and excruciating process I've ever been through. So not only am I holding a container for other people that are going through some pretty traumatic stuff, I also had to be held and seen and supported in my own stuff using the tools and some of the deeper coaching that this program entailed. So that's where the word master comes from.
Yeah. It's really hard. Yeah, like you said, being able to go through your journey yourself and then also helping others. Cause I've been in that where, cause like I'll be sharing my story of just like my story of abuse and just sharing my story of like starting my business, and people will just ask me because I love helping them, but it's sometimes you just don't feel like ready to, take on helping someone else at that time, or you don't have that capacity, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
That would be very hard.
Yeah, it was very, very hard. So I had, stuff coming up, all of my own hurts and wounds and traumas and things while I'm trying to support and hold for other people. And that was the whole point, was that
Yeah.
it really built out my capacity. Some folks call it the window of tolerance. I prefer to call it my window of dignity or my window of capacity, for
I
me to
like that.
be able to just clean up some of my own stuff and really stand in my truth and
Right.
stand in my own personal dignity.
I love that.
Yeah.
So I just personally feel like a lot of people could use a master boundary coach, and I am one of them. If anyone's new to my channel or has followed me for a while, um, you'll probably know, like, I've talked about people pleasing, boundaries. They're just a huge problem. And as an entrepreneur who's comes from a life of like past abuse and trauma, which a lot of us are, especially people watching this, it is so difficult for us to have boundaries, or the lines of boundaries are blurred
Mm.
for us. So is that kind of what came up for you in your story? Like, how did you get into, I guess, that niche area? Through the program that you were teaching in, or just?
Yeah, the program I was working through showed me a lot about my patterns, which,
Okay.
is really, boundary work is really self-discovery work.
Right.
Boundary work is self-worth work. And really what boundary work is cleaning out those patterns of people pleasing, those patterns of subordinating, plaguing, appeasing. Because for many of us, I don't like to call people pleasers. I don't like to label, because so many people, it's like they put that stamp on their head and then they run around like they've got a big label on their head. Like, I am a people pleaser. I am a codependent. You're actually not.
Yeah.
Who you are. It's really important for your listeners to understand it's a part of who you are. It is a part of you that took on this role. Let's just keep it in the lane of people pleasing for right now.
Yes.
You took on that role to create safety in your life. You were looking for approval. You were looking for control, which in essence is what brought in that feeling of psychological safety. So many of us, boundaries were, we were raised in homes where boundaries were broken, boundaries weren't modeled, boundaries were blurred, all sorts of different scenarios. And we lost, in essence, really our freedom to choose, right? So much of boundary work is about just choice, being able to choose what feels good to me, what doesn't feel good to me. What do I have the capacity for in this season of my life? And so boundary work is actually really, really deep and rich and nuanced. And that's really what led me to it, was looking at my own patterns of people pleasing, codependency, going, okay, where did this stuff get started? And then boundary work just showed up everywhere in my life, everywhere in my client's life. Everything led me to boundaries. So that's why I decided to niche down, because they're that essential.
They are. And I don't, like, you're the only boundary coach I have yet to come across. So that's why I was like, I have to have you on my show, because it isn't, sometimes we don't, especially as those who are abusers, or maybe haven't gone through their personal development or self-help journey, or just new in the, like, they're just trying to survive, like, their day to day, but there eventually becomes a point where you have an awareness of, I'm not sticking up for myself. I'm not loving myself, kind of like what you were saying with self-worthiness, and I'm not sticking to my boundaries. So when you say creating that awareness and then digging back into it, all starts like with our younger child. Like you and I had talked about in our initial connection call about our inner child. So I'm curious, from your perspective, and someone who's a mom, and a lot of listeners are moms, do you know maybe like an understanding that why of how that kind of contributes to us as adults? And not, oh wait, hold on, let me back up, sorry. How, from your understanding, what kind of maybe causes this, if that's the right word. Like, how does our family dynamics get so blurred? Or like, because that you said is the contributing factor. Like, we have these wounds, we have these things that need healed from our past. Do you have like a good answer for us? Or is that like still like, it depends? I know that sometimes that's an answer.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. One of my favorite quotes, maybe this will summarize it, and then we'll play with this a little bit. One of my favorite quotes is the unmet needs of our inner child are what create havoc in our adult life. So if you are starting to see chaos, havoc in your relationships, you're starting to identify patterns, you're doing some avoidance type things in your friendships, all of a sudden you're avoiding in your intimate relationships, we've got to look at what went down in your family of origin as a little one, right?
Yes, right.
So like for me personally, it's not that boundaries were blurred per se. I just wasn't modeled boundaries in my home life at all. What my home life looked like was an environment that was very rigid, that was very judgmental, that was very emotions are not to be expressed. It was just stifled. No, thank you. We're fine. Nothing to see here, folks. Keep on moving on.
Which I feel like is very like in our parents' and grandparents' time was the norm. That was very much the norm. So I feel like that probably contributes heavily to the family dynamics, even now.
Yeah. And I watched a mother be really rigid with her boundaries coming from fear. Her boundaries came from fear. So anytime we see somebody being really, really rigid with their boundaries, we know that their come from is probably control, which is based in fear. I understand that now.
Could you give an example of what a rigid boundary would look like or display as, just for anyone who maybe doesn't know? Like what would that show up as?
Oh gosh, there could be a million and one things, but let's just say, your 10-year-old comes to you and says, Mommy, I got invited to the birthday party on Friday night of Sam in my class, and it's my first sleepover. And there's no conversation. There's no calling Sam's mom. There is nothing. There is just this reaction of absolutely, you're not going. Nope. And I had some of that tendency with my own kids because I was basing my boundaries in fear. Right.
Okay.
So that was kind of my upbringing, was just control, judgment, criticism, rigidity, my way or the highway, on top of being very kind of right-wing religious. So we kind of had a lot of that happening.
Yeah.
And as a result, my self-worth, my self-love was about that, if even that. Like I didn't have admiration for myself. I didn't have self-respect. I didn't have self-regard, self-trust, self-value, because if my own caregivers couldn't mirror back to me my worth. I mean, that is a parent's responsibility.
Yes.
That is a parent's responsibility, to mirror back to you your worth, your value, your enoughness, to meet your physical and emotional needs. Now, I had all of my physical needs met: shoes, backpack, meals, bedroom. I had a comforter with butterflies, matching, window treatments. I had all of that, but none of my emotional needs were met. There was no play. There wasn't laughter. There wasn't freedom to really express and be myself. I believed that who I was wrong, because that was the environment that I was raised in. Like, you can't be free to feel that and think that and say that. It was just very stifled. So in order to, I needed to know that I mattered. Like, as children, we need to know. And if the caregivers, the parents, the big people, as I like to say, in your life are not mirroring that to you, you're going to find that somewhere. Like, it's a need. It's a deep need to know I belong. I matter, right? I have importance. So I started to go outside of myself to figure that out. And it was, who do I need to be to make you happy? Oh, you want me to be this person? totally. Oh yeah, I can do that.
Mhm.
I can wear those kind of clothes. I can fit in with you. I can blend with you. Oh, you need me to do this? Got it. Totally. Yep. I'll take care of that. So it was this constant contorting, and I call it chameleonism, where, it didn't matter who I was with. I could blend and alter myself to be whatever they needed me to be, so that I felt that sense of safety and approval and belonging.
And I think that hits a huge nail on the head, especially for a lot of our viewers. That is what leads to causing, especially from, like, in my case, um, become more susceptible to being abused, because you're looking for that approval, you're looking for that love. I know early on in my personal development journey, the coach that I worked with, it was all about self-love and self-acceptance. That it was like the biggest thing we worked on, because that's what made it so hard for me to start my business. But you need to find yourself worthy and you have to love yourself to fulfill your own needs. But that contorting chameleonism, that is, I feel like, a lot, that is where a lot of people, they don't realize they're doing it. It's very subconscious, and it's sometimes not until after something drastic happens that you look back and you're like, why did this happen? And then there's the shame and the guilt that comes along with it, and you blame yourself, but it's really, you're not at fault. And I like how you said earlier, that's not who you are. You can always grow and evolve and change. So I think that's really important
I
for
think
what
our
our
soul,
viewers.
yeah. Oh, I think that is absolutely important to point out for the listeners,
Yeah.
is that our soul is always seeking to expand, to grow, to evolve. So we will continue to attract people into our life that will teach us the lesson. It's not comfortable.
No.
We'll continue to attract friendships, intimate partnerships, whatever, to help us grow, expand, and evolve. And we've got to be willing to do the work. It's so important to do the work to heal, so that we stop attracting unhealthy folks that are feeding off of some of our patterns from childhood. And it's not who you are, and it's not your fault. I always say it is not your fault. It is your faulty conditioning. There's a really big difference, because some people just will take, like you said, their choices, their habits, their actions, their behaviors, and they will just douse themselves down with more shame and more guilt. And it's not helpful. If it was helpful, it would have worked by now. but
Right.
but it is your responsibility, now that you are a grown adult, to do something to heal. I
Yeah.
don't care if it's a book, I don't care if it's a podcast, if it's a coach, if it's a therapist, whatever. It is your responsibility to heal the pattern.
Yes. Especially as someone who's very aware and does not want to pass on generational trauma to their children. I think that is like I always say this is like the double-edged sword of social media, because it brings, like, there's so many negative things about social media, but on the one side, like, there's so much more knowledge and awareness that has been brought about, that we didn't have, or our parents didn't have when they were younger, about what is trauma and healing your inner child and just meeting those emotional needs. But how do we then heal ourselves to then model it for our children, so that they're not experiencing that? Because that's one of the biggest things that, when I was leaving my abusive situation, and so many moms or dads who are leaving an abusive situation, is like, how do I prevent this from happening to my kids?
Yeah.
And we have to then look for the tools to heal ourselves, because obviously we need something to help us through it. That's like the biggest thing I've seen. And sometimes those resources are not talked about in traditional support centers, or centers that are maybe just overburdened in cities and states, that they kind of just push talk therapy, or, which there's nothing wrong with that. I never want anyone, but because of entrepreneurship and the online space, you can easily be connected with people like Krista, or people who I've done like NLP and RTT. There are many ways that you can find that help that you're talking about, that to heal your inner child, which we will link. I will have Krista send me the link to, so we can add that into the show notes as well, in case anybody wants to start with that book, because your information will also be tagged if someone's feeling compelled to, and are starting to realize maybe I need help with my boundaries. But I kind of went off in a tangent about the social media thing, and then I lost my question for you, because I was like, it's just so good. I like want to reiterate for people just what you're saying too, because sometimes there are people who are in multiple stages of their journey listening to us. So it's like some people aren't even aware of what caused these patterns, while some are actively searching.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And to your point, I love this statement. When we heal ourselves, we heal the next generation. Doing the work of you is not selfish. It's not wrong. It's not whatever somebody has maybe told you. It is the best gift that you can give your child. I am working with a client right now who is, well, how do I do this with, and I'm not a parenting coach, but it always comes up inevitably in a lot of our sessions about how do I do this with my child? And what do I do about this? And how do I, and it always comes back to doing your own work so that you can stand with yourself when he's having a tantrum, when he is, whatever's happening. You've really got to be able to stay true to yourself and not, I don't want to say not go into that fight or flight mode, because you're human and it happens. But when you resource yourself and have the tools, you're not having something come out of your mouth that you can't take back. You're not having some sort of behavior come out that you can't, I don't want to say you can undo, because repair is, oh my gosh, repair is huge. The power of repair is extraordinary. And when you're doing your own work and healing yourself, the amount of times you get stuck in those patterns becomes less and less, and you can pull yourself out of them quicker and quicker.
Yeah, I think that's that's when we're in those panic or stressed out situations as parents, where we're like sleep deprived, or we feel pulled in a million directions, because, a lot of my followers, they are business owners, some are not, but you're pulled in a million directions, whether it be your own business or work or the kids, and just, you snap. So like we need to build those habits, and they can change, because I'm guilty of it too. Like I snap off, and I'm like, but I can see now where I'm like, that's my parents' parenting coming into play, not blaming them at all. They didn't know better though. Like I've forgiven them for that piece. But like you said, repair is so crucial in that process. What kind of tips could you give to our viewers to help maybe start that repair process, or if they are just unsure of where to begin? And in all of this, they're like, okay, now I'm aware, but how do I get started?
You know what was really present for me right now is the word authenticity. And it was something that I wasn't aware. I didn't, like, I knew the word, but I'm like, I don't know, everybody uses the word authenticity. What does that actually mean? But even morning, I'm just having a week where I was eyes wide open at 1:55. And once typically I come out of that deep sleep, there I lay for several hours. And my partner knows, my kids know, my window of capacity when I do not get at least 7 hours of sleep, I prefer 8, is about like that. I mean, there ain't nothing there. I know ain't isn't a word technically, but my window of capacity is nil. And so it's having those moments where we look at our kids and we say, Mom is really having a tough morning. I did not get the sleep that I am required, and I'm really struggling. I'm really struggling. And I had that conversation with my partner today, and he gave me a big hug. He's like, I know it's really hard for you when you don't get your sleep, because I've been willing to be vulnerable and be authentic with him. I shouldn't say old me, but my pattern was I would wake up and I would just be almost in like fight mode, like, everybody's out to get me, because lack of sleep would lead me into this spiral of just negativity and ornery. Yeah, I'm just a bear. And I would lash out. That was that was my MO. That was kind of my pattern, was lashing out. And now I'm able to hit the power of the pause button. That's a big tip as well. That was a lot of my work right there. A lot of what I coach around, teach, share is not earth-shattering stuff. It's not these like big, it's the simple, tiny things like hitting the pause button. I did not have a pause button. I did not have a button. It was dysregulation, bleh. Dysregulation, people please. Dysregulation, bury my head in work, right? Like anytime I became triggered, activated, dysregulated, whatever word we wanted to use, I would abandon myself. I would abandon my own internal boundaries, and I would go into my patterns. So the power of the pause button was like clouds part, heavens pour down, like, what? Why hasn't anybody ever taught me this? And it's really, really hard for me to just stop for a moment and breathe. The breath is one of the fastest ways to come home to yourself, to get back into your body, or to look around the room and go, okay, rectangles. I see a rectangle. Okay. I see a piece of paper that's a rectangle. I see a manila folder, rectangle. Okay. I see the computer, rectangle, just doing whatever I could to come back into the body. Scent is really one of the most powerful ones for me. Like, what am I smelling right now? Gets me back into the body, brings me back home to myself, brings me back into that place of regulation where I can really speak and express from my place of power rather than from my pattern. So I would say the power of the pause, and whatever you do in that pause. Sometimes what can happen even in that pause is, I need time to answer your question. Like, I'm somebody that marinates in questions. I need to think about that, right?
Yeah.
And I need 24 hours. Like, that can be like, just speaking that can be your pause button. You don't have to answer somebody right away.
That's something I still struggle with to this day. But like, that was a big thing in my personality I had to fix after leaving my abusive relationship, because I would get so triggered by my abuser that I felt like I had to respond immediately, especially when we were fighting. And I had to be like, you need to know why I'm right. Like, there was part of me at that age, when I was so young, and I was like, everyone needs to hear, like, if I think they're wrong, they need to hear it. Like, or I need to explain this, or like, I just didn't know how to communicate well enough, like what I was feeling. But then the spiral would happen. And I still sometimes have to be like, you don't have to answer this right now. You don't have to respond. You don't have to. And I still do that in business too. And I think there's a lot of service providers who also feel that way, because I've seen and worked with so many people who boundaries are also an issue there, because they want to please their clients. They want to do whatever they can. And being able to take a pause, like, sometimes like you just need to hear that. Like, you need to hear it from someone else to know, like, it's okay. Like, now I'm to the point where I'm like, if I answer them, I get to them. Or if I'm like, okay, part of this is also my like OCD/ADHD. I'm like, if it's in front of me, I want to complete it. I don't want to come back to it. But so now I'm like, hey, I need time to think about this. Or, I saw your message. I'm gonna, like, this and this, you can expect a response by this time period. And like, I'll mark it unread again. So then that's kind of like my system, whatever works for you. Like, or I flag it and label it. It's just like a trial and error thing that I've noticed that worked. Like, for anyone watching, you can mark them unread. You can have a specific label. Just because I am a systems person, I have to have that. But I did not know that for the longest time. Like, or just like it didn't click because of my lack of boundaries was responding right away. Like you don't have to respond right away. The world is not going to end if you don't respond right away.
The boundary actually can be, I don't know. I talk about this all the time. The boundary can be, I don't know right now. I am literally, I mean, I was actually speaking about myself. What I've learned about myself is, for me, boundaries are very somatic. They're very felt in the body. And in order to get the feedback of what the body is communicating to me, I need time to think about that. I need to lean into what's happening in my body when I think about having this person on my podcast. What's happening in my body when I'm thinking about going to that party on Friday night, or whatever the situation is. And in order to get the feedback and really lean in and listen, I have to give myself space. So the boundary gets to be, I don't know right now. I'll let you know in 24 or 48 hours. So the power of the pause is huge because it's stopping us from going into pattern. That's what it's doing. And again, a boundary, and there's so many definitions of boundary, and quite truthfully, I think they're all valid. And I like them all. Like there's not a wrong definition of boundary.
Right.
The definition that I do like to play with, that is my favorite, that it's my come from and what I sort of teach and use in my work, is the boundary, as I like to call it, whatever boundary you're setting, is the point at which you can no longer be your authentic self. So it's that moment where something is happening in your external world and you're like, oh, I'm feeling really activated or triggered or, dysregulated right now. And I'm about to self-abandon. I'm about to go into my perfectionistic tendency. I'm about to go into my people-pleasing mode. I'm about to subordinate. I'm about to not implement that boundary that I know is so essential.
Yeah.
So that is my come from boundaries. And so that's really where the power of the pause stops everything and lets us just come back home to self before we break our own boundary.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I would love to ask, just for the viewer's sake and just for my own sake, because I mean, long ago, there was a time where I didn't have any boundaries. And those of us who are dealing with trauma, or recovering from trauma, we don't know how to even set those boundaries, or we don't know. Yeah, I feel like that's the biggest part, is like, how do we even identify what boundaries to set? Because that was a big thing I went through in my business at the beginning at first, and then it started trickling into my personal life. Like, what are my non-negotiables is what I would call them, like, to work with somebody, because I would say yes to anything and everything. I've since learned, like, you can't do that because it's not really about me, but it's like not in service of me, but then it's also affecting the client. So saying yes to everything and everyone is not always in service to you. Even though your brain is tricking you to think like you have to, because that's your subconscious reaction. But like, how do we even set a good boundary? I know you mentioned like listening into ourselves, but some of us struggle with that because trust yourself.
Yes, because so many of us have lived outside of our bodies. It's like, it's almost like astronauts because of the trauma that you're speaking about. It wasn't safe to come home to ourselves. It wasn't safe to express. It wasn't safe to be who we authentically and wonderfully are. Right. So for some folks to lean into the body, it's like, what? I can't do that. That is not an option for me. Right.
Yeah. I know that feeling.
Yeah, I get that. And I want to honor that. If that's available to you, amazing. Start tracking. Do you have little belly zaps? Does your chest get tight? Does something happen in your throat? Is there a pain in your right shoulder? I know someone that used to get a tension in their biceps. It was almost as if somebody had their hands tied behind their backs. Yeah. their back. They only have one back, not backs.
I get what you mean though. That's crazy.
Yeah, hence the tension in their biceps, like somebody was holding them back. So if that is available to you, start leaning into the body and start noticing somatically, where does this show up for me? For me, it's always the lump in the throat. So just a really quick example, we were at a social gathering several months ago and somebody wanted to tell me a joke. And I'm like, oh, cool, shoot, go ahead. I want to hear a joke.
Yeah.
And so they said the joke and it was offensive. And in that moment, I could feel the lump in my throat. And that was for so many years of not being able to express my truth and my voice.
Yeah.
That's how it shows up for me somatically. It also shows up for me as if someone took the temperature of my body and increased it 5 bajillion degrees. So those are always my signs. Ding, ding, ding. Boundary's been violated here. The person didn't even know that was a boundary, right? So they weren't going, we're going to violate her boundary and show her this offensive joke. They thought it was hysterical. I did not. So I had a place in that moment. I knew, because the lump in the throat and the increase of the body temperature, you're about to abandon yourself. You're either going to speak your truth and say, I don't take kindly to that joke, or however I framed that up.
Yeah.
Or you're going to step into your people pleasing pattern and you're going to go, ha, isn't that funny? So that this person would like me and then they wouldn't be mad at me and I wouldn't upset the apple cart. Right.
Right. Which we tend to do quite a bit. Yeah.
Which is why I say the definition I love is the boundary is the point at which we can no longer be ourselves. So in that moment, it was like a fork in the road. I had a choice to make. Was I going to not be myself and not speak my truth for the sake of this person here? Or was I going to stand my ground and honor who I am and honor what I value?
That's a good point. I feel like a lot of people too, they just brush it off, especially if it's like someone they're not going to be around a lot, or they're like assess like, am I going to have to see this person again? Like, but
and
then
sometimes that can be valid, but how we do anything is how we do everything.
Right.
So
it's those little moments that define us.
It is those little moments, and you are the one that has to lay your head on the pillow at night and wake up the next morning knowing you were out of integrity with you. And at some point, abandoning yourself has to matter more than appeasing that person. It just has to. At some point, we've got to get serious about that. So if the somatic symptoms are available for your listeners, awesome. And I also understand that they're not for everybody. So we'll talk about that as well. I think, to your point, really looking at a question I love to play with is, what do I require? What are my actual requests? This would be nice to have, versus what are my requirements? My requirements are, I'm in relationship with people who allow me to be myself, who allow me to speak my truth, who allow me to share my opinion. I'm not going to be in relationship with somebody who tells me that, every time I turn around, that I'm wrong for thinking that way. I'm wrong for feeling that way. I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't do that. That is a requirement. It is a requirement for me that I don't be in relationship with people who, are in fight mode all the time and, wanting to be taking the world out and, constantly have something to gripe about and be negative. That's a requirement in my relationships. So we have to look at, okay, what are my nice to haves versus what are the things that I actually require for myself?
Right.
Which also comes back to a really big part of boundaries. We could also play with it if that didn't land for the listeners. What are your needs? What do you need? I mean, boundaries can actually be as simple as that. Like, we don't know what our needs are. And I'm going like this because that's like the foundation, like a house, right?
Yeah.
Needs are sort of the foundation. We can't really set a boundary around something when we don't even know what we need.
Yeah.
Right? So I need order in my home in order for things to, I'm using the word order a lot.
Yeah.
I like order in my home because it fulfills that need that I have for peace. So if I walk upstairs right now, because I've got 2 adultish sons living with me, and the dish, the sink is full of dirty dishes. Yes, I have a responsibility to regulate myself and not come unglued, right?
Yeah.
That's on me. I have to take ownership and responsibility. And I
Yeah.
also have a responsibility to make a request of them. Listen,
Yeah.
I feel angry when you leave dirty dishes in the sink because in the spaces we share, I have a need for order.
Yeah.
And when
Oh, that hit so many nails on the head for so many people. I think for just in personal life and business, like I remember whenever like the difficulties of just communicating those needs to people when my now fiance, soon to be husband, um, when we moved in together, I was like, I don't know how to communicate this to you, but this is driving me insane. Like those little things that they don't realize they drive them insane until they live with someone else.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So really be thinking about what are my actual needs here?
Yeah.
Some of our needs and we all share universal needs. So it's not that I need coffee, because that's not a universal need. Not everybody has that same need.
Right.
Needs are actually universal. There's something that everybody wants and desires. Needs like belonging, needs like connection, peace,
Right.
play. There's something that every human on the planet wants for themselves. Coffee is the way, coffee is the strategy of how I bring in that feeling of peace. There's nothing better to me than my first sip of morning coffee.
Oh yeah. Like if I have a bad cup of coffee, I'm like, my day is going to be crap.
Yeah. So needs are a really great way to get clarity around where we might need to be setting some boundaries.
And for our listeners, if you haven't already, if this is a new video or you're just stumbling upon this would also go really well with my previous interview with Casey Hall. We talk about feelings and that like kind of triggers a need not being met. So we kind of talk about that in that interview just to tie it all full circle. Like if you're watching this, go back and watch that interview with Casey because she explains it way better than I could about, if you're starting to feel things and feeling dysregulated. She shared like a whole framework that you can find to, identify when you're feeling this way, what need maybe isn't being met if you are new to all of this and haven't been able to do this for yourself. I just wanted to point that out too.
The simple way to think about it, and we don't always, to your point, have the vocabulary, and there's lots of resources out there where you can find, I have a needs and feelings inventory. The listeners can get a hold of that if they'd like, but
good.
An unmet need equals an unpleasant feeling. Now notice I didn't say negative. There are things as negative and positive, good, bad feelings. And anger can be kind of unpleasant, right? Sadness can be kind of unpleasant. So if you have an unpleasant feeling, disappointment, frustration, anger, hurt, sadness, frustration, whatever, I think I already said frustration, you've got an unmet need. What's the need? What's really going on underneath the surface?
Right.
Feeling, happiness, joy, peace, whatever, met need.
Yeah.
And usually when I share that with people, they're like, wow, that in and of itself can be so mind-blowing for people.
Because we're structured to think that they're bad emotions, and that they shouldn't feel that way. That's like the biggest thing I try to instill in my older daughter, now my newer, like my baby, who she doesn't understand this, but it's like they are allowed to have those emotions because when we were younger, you couldn't have that negative emotion as it was labeled but then I grew up thinking like it was not good to be sad. It wasn't good to be whatever. Like you had to hide it. But really you need to feel those to get on to the next thing.
Yeah.
To like grow and be a human. Okay to feel that way.
Yeah. We have a whole spectrum of emotions so that we can actually feel them all. I'm not saying that they're all pleasant. No.
No, yeah.
Very discomforting. But we have a whole spectrum so that we can feel and ride the waves of each and every one. And when
Yeah.
you're feeling something unpleasant, there is an unmet need that is happening. And remember, the unmet needs of our inner child are what create havoc, chaos, whatever you want to call it, in our adult life. So if you are seeing some chaos in your relationships, in your life, we've got to look at those unmet needs. And then we can start setting boundaries around those things so we can start getting those needs met.
Yes. And I think one thing, because we've talked about this a couple of times, and I want to point it out for the listeners, is if you're identifying these boundaries and you're identifying these needs, and you can communicate them to your partner or your person or whoever you're living with, and they're not respecting them or not like understanding of it or willing to understand or listening, then that's like a true red flag sign that you could be in a relationship that you need to leave if you can, because those are things that I never realized. And like a lot of people, maybe those are red flags that sometimes people aren't aware of.
Yeah.
So, because your partner should be able to respect that if you can communicate them to them, I should say. Because like I know sometimes it's hard for us to communicate those needs and communicate those requirements. But if you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, there could be some chaos, but if they're not respecting those, then you have to really address, or assess, I should say, like, is this a good relationship that I'm in?
It's feedback for you. Now, with that being said, and it would depend on the situation, it might be a situation where that person at that moment does not have the capacity to meet. They may not have the capacity. They may not have the desire, but nonetheless, it's feedback for you to go, okay, what am I going to do with this feedback? The ball is in my court now. They've volleyed it back. They're giving me the feedback that they don't want to meet this need. They don't have the capacity. Now, how do I want to move forward? It's all feedback.
Right. And I think I should clarify too. It's like, if there's that longer term, like I totally get being in the moment, like if you're upset or you don't have the capacity in that moment, because there's times I'm like, I don't feel like I meet my partner's needs now if I'm running on E and he's running on E. But it's like that long term, just thinking from a person who's been in abusive relationships, for the listeners who some maybe aren't yet, is, that's a tactic of an abuser. They say they're going to change and they will meet that need, but then the action doesn't follow through. So I should have clarified and said like a long-term support for you, because
we want to watch for patterns is what we want to watch.
That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Yeah. So I think those are good points and realizations that you've brought to everyone, because it is important, and I don't think enough people talk about it in this way. And you hit it on the nail on the head really at the beginning too. It all comes down to your self-love and your self-worth, and valuing yourself as well. Is there anything else or like last little bit that you want to share, like parting note for our listeners as we start to wrap up that maybe we didn't cover? Because I feel like we did cover so much and so much goodness in this interview.
Self-compassion. Really just riding that wave through all of it, knowing that you're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. So many people approach their boundary journey, their self-worth journey, their self-love journey, their healing journey with this idea and belief that that they're broken, that they need to be fixed. And that is not truth. That is not truth. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. You are enough. You matter. You are valuable. You have worth. You just have patterns. You just have some, it's like when you go to make a cake and all of a sudden you realize, well, shoot, I'm down one egg and I don't have the vegetable oil or the canola oil. So it's like you try to make this cake without a couple of ingredients. So many of us are just missing a couple of ingredients, things, tools that we didn't get in our childhood, skills, needs that didn't get met, but we're not broken. And so to understand that and to show yourself massive self-compassion, knowing you're doing the best that you could and that you can with the skills, knowledge, tools, and awareness that you have at the current time is massive. Massive.
Yes. And just being able to forgive yourself too, just to feed off of that, because, and it's okay to ask for help. If you don't have the tools, there's no shame in asking for help, especially if it's someone like Krista or other professionals who want to and can help you, because sometimes, like you said, it's it's small tweaks and habit changing. It can be hard, and it's nice to have someone to hold you accountable, because you can definitely, tell yourself, oh, just this one time, or, oh, I'm gonna but it's being able to in a healthy way, be aware and make those changes. And sometimes it helps to have someone with you on that journey.
It's essential.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for joining us, Krista. And I know the viewers have a lot to go and can process now after this interview. And I'm so thankful that you shared with us and took the time to record with me today and share all your knowledge.
Thank you. It's been a real honor and a treat to be here with you.
Thank you so much.